Welcome back, everybody, coast to coast, This Week in America. Thank you for being with us on today's program. It's being called the must-read for parents of daughters, athletic directors, school principals, university presidents, and coaches of youth, high school, and college sports. How college athletics are hurting girls' sports, the pay-to-play pipeline by Rick Eckstein, an experienced media commentator. His research on sports widely cited in media such as the New York Times, Christian Science Monitor, Philadelphia Inquirer, Newsday, and many others. Professor of Sociology at Villanova University, recipient of the 2012 Excellence in Teaching Award for the College of Arts and Sciences, award-winning author of Public Dollars, Private Stadiums, and Nuclear Power and Social Power, a BA from Marietta College, PhD from State University of New York, Stony Brook, for over 15 years a volunteer for youth sports. A look at college sports and how they shape the athletic and personal landscape for girls and young women. Rick Eckstein, author of How College Athletics Are Hurting Girls Sports, the pay-to-play pipeline, and he's with us on This Week in America. Rick, welcome to the program. It's great to have you with us on the show today.
Thank you, Rick. It's great to be with you.
I have been looking forward to this. It's a very important topic. And as I understand, this all started for you over a period of 8, 9, 10 years in class, listening to student stories. You started an investigation, went on for like 3 years researching the topic. Talk about how this whole process began for you.
And one thread of it was the experiences I had in the classroom with the varsity athletes who would be taking my courses. And I started to see more and more of them, and especially the women, not only the women, but especially the women. They'd come in with severe injuries. They'd be on crutches. They'd be experiencing a concussion. And as we got to discussing things in class, some of their experiences, both with youth sports and college sports, I started to see some patterns, including quite an increase in people who started to really exhibit signs of burning out and disliking these sports that have been part of their lives for a dozen years or so, and some of them saying that they just never wanted to touch a soccer ball or a softball bat or a lacrosse stick or anything having to do with these sports ever again. They become disillusioned. They become people who no longer enjoy playing the sport. And even looking back, some of them would indicate that all along they weren't enjoying the sport as much as they thought they should have or could have, but were staying around and staying involved mostly because they were dreaming, or their parents more likely were dreaming, that they'd somehow get a college scholarship. Now mix that together with my experience as a youth sports coach and watching the commercial madness that was going on all around me in sports like soccer and to some extent softball and basketball. And that was a recipe for really wanting to get into this topic in more detail and kind of give a voice to the girls who were going through this process in some ways having their childhood taken away from them. I thought that was kind of sad, and they should be able to express themselves, and maybe we could try to figure out why this was going on.
Mention the extensive research. You focused on 5 sports. Talk about the 5 sports and how you chose these were the ones you were going to look into.
Well, the main premise of the book is that the various youth sports, whatever the youth sports happens to be, and this is especially true for girls, it's going to be really driven by what's going on at the college level. So my argument is those sports that have the largest intercollegiate footprints with the most scholarships, with the most visibility, those are going to have a correspondingly intense commercial youth sports industry. So I needed to find sports that represented the various iterations of that relationship. So I chose soccer as one of really 5 sports that is played nationwide. It's very intense. It has a very, very involved commercial presence. At the other end of the spectrum, I selected Ultimate Frisbee, which has no intercollegiate presence at all, and as a result, a very, very small, modest commercial presence. And then somewhere in the middle, I looked at figure skating and ice skating, or ice hockey, as almost a Jekyll and Hyde visions of each other or reflections of each other. And then finally field hockey, which is it's kind of a geographically niche sport. It's played mostly in the Northeast and the Mid-Atlantic. And so it has a smaller intercollegiate footprint, but still a significant one. But its youth sports presence is pretty static. Its commercial youth sports industry is static and maybe even shrinking a bit. And again, my argument is that because its college footprint is static or shrinking, so is its youth sports footprint.
The book we're talking about is How College Athletics Are Hurting Girls' Sports, The Pay-to-Play Pipeline, the author Rick Eckstein with us on This Week in America. The book is available all across the country. If you go to our website, thisweekinamerica.us, you can link on directly to information on Rick's book. You do, many of your stories are composites. You did extensive research, extensive interviews. Talk about the composites, and then I want to talk about a couple people that you've named specifically in here, Susan and Claire, and then Susan's mom, Kim, because their story really reflects some of the common themes you found as you were doing the research. Talk about the composite story, how you developed that, and this sort of speak from what you found, because this was, when you talk to these people, they were not unique stories. You found a common theme through most of these.
That's exactly right, Rick. So as I was doing the interviews, and there were dozens and dozens of interviews with youth sports families, both parents and with kids of various ages. And originally, I was going to present each voice as a sort of separate voice, but the overlap was just so strong. I thought it would become kind of boring to just repeat the same stories over and over again. So I believe that it creates a better narrative when you can kind of combine these many voices who have these common themes into a single person. It's easier to keep track of them. So you remember people like Susan, you remember people like Kim, even though their stories were related similarly by at least 5 or 6 other people. So you pick and choose from the parent group, you pick and choose from the player group, from the kid group, and in order to protect their anonymity, it's also creating these composites. Doesn't let anyone really sort of figure out who's talking. If you pick up the book and say, "Oh, well, that's my friend Josie. I know she said that." Well, you can't say that because it's 3 or 4 girls combined. Except in the case of some of the stories really were related much more clearly and vividly by a single person, but that's for people to guess. I think the content is what's really important, and these are the voices of the parents and the voices especially of the girls and young women.
The one you talk about, Susan, the mom is Kim. Kim is saying, I feel responsible for what my daughter is today, which is a person that has some real physical limitation. It's hard for her to walk, and I feel like I should have set some limits when she was involved in playing youth sports. Talk about that, because that's a recurring theme with many of the people you talk to.
Yeah, there was a real contradiction in some of the stories and the attitudes that parents exhibited. On the one hand, they were much more than the kids, kind of over the top. They were the driving force within the family. No girl who's 4 or 5 or 6 years old is thinking about playing on a travel soccer team so she can get a college scholarship. She's worried about learning how to tie her shoes and making sure that her friend around the corner doesn't hate her. But the parents are thinking about this, and so the parents are the main driving force behind the pipeline, given the commercial context, of course. But it's the parents who allow this to happen. And so you find parents who are both over the top, and at the same time, when they see their kids burning out, when they see their kids getting hurt, they start to regret it and maybe even resent themselves for being those kinds of crazy sports parents that we see on some of the Netflix shows, if you've watched them. But they don't think of themselves as over the top. They think of themselves as just doing what's best for their kids. They think of themselves as wanting to give their kids the opportunities that maybe they never had. We're making sure that their kids have every opportunity to play a sport and perhaps play it into college. So the parents, I watched some of them kind of break down as we would get into the conversations a little more. They want to do what's best for their kids, and then they come to the reality also that college sports isn't all that it's cranked up to be. The scholarships are really non-existent, or they're much smaller than they thought. The admissions advantages into Ivy League schools or other premier schools, which they thought were there, really aren't there, or at least not in the quantity that they were led to believe. So they feel, in some regards, like they've had the wool pull over their eyes and that they've been sold a bill of goods. And unfortunately, the girls are kind of caught in the middle. They're just kids, and they have to listen to their parents. And some of them quit, and some of them don't quit because they know it would really upset their parents. And those are some of the sad stories that I tried to tell.
In the case with Susan, a number of knee surgeries really impacted how she's able to get through the rest of her life, a quality of life issue. And you talk about the three themes that kept coming up, and one of those was the amount of injuries, severe injuries the female athletes would have, and the mental anguish as well. And you've got that described in Claire, who basically had a breakdown because of all the pressure. So the physical aspect, the mental aspect of it, the detrimental impact was something you found in many cases.
Yeah, and the physical, I think the important thing to remember about the physical problems that girls are experiencing, and girls, post-pubescent girls, have lower leg injuries at 4 to 8 times the level of corresponding sports. So this is not something that's just for kids. This is something that impacts girls and young women more than it impacts boys and young men. So the injury rates are high, and they come a large degree from specialization. And there's been a lot of discussion about whether specialization is a good thing or a bad thing. From a physical point of view, and probably from a mental point of view, specializing in one sport at early and earlier ages is harmful. It uses the same group, you don't cross train, and you may learn to actually dislike something that you used to like. But commercialization specialization is a commercial phenomenon. There are elite teams, elite clubs who demand that if you want to be part of them and get into these pipelines and allegedly have a ticket to college sports, you have to specialize. You have to play all year round. You have to do summer clinics. You have to do camps. You have to do off season. You have to do training. You have to do nutrition. And the prices keep adding up, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, $10,000. And people are at age 12 and 13 giving up their off season, playing one sport, only one sport, and that's not good for them. It's increasing. More and more girls are specializing in sports at early and earlier ages, despite all the voices saying that that's a bad thing. The commercial imperatives are, if you want to play on our top level team, you will play only this sport.
Well, it's interesting because you talk about there's always the next level. And as I'm reading the book, there always is. And that's one of the reasons that the youth, the young athlete, will continue to play, because they're afraid if they don't, they're not going to make the all-star team. And the all-star team is the next level. Then you've got the traveling team. Then you've got, elite teams, and you've got elite camps. Talk about that, because all of this is to lead to college, and it's all sort of dangled out there that you need to do this. And you're right, you got the specialization. Then we'll talk in a second about the college scholarship, because I'm shocked to find out a scholarship isn't necessarily a scholarship. But first, all the next level, there's always something out there enticing them to keep playing, isn't there?
Yeah, it's something of a almost perfect marketing mantra, right? That you
Yes.
never quite get there. There's always something beyond. So it's kind of like Sisyphus, pushing that rock up the hill. In this case, there's always something that's more important. And then the rub is when you get to that final level, which is playing sports in college. It's been cranked up to be such a wondrous thing, and you get there, and it's really not as special as you might have thought it would be. Now, this is not all girls and young women. This may not even be most girls and young women, but far too many. They get to college, they're involved in sports, they're working 20, 30, sometimes more hours a week for their sport in season. They're working at their sport out of season by doing strength and conditioning. They're getting hurt, they're bored, they're upset, their grades are suffering. They sometimes, this is what leads to them maybe regretting being involved in this endeavor in the first place. So it kind of comes up and surprises them that something they've worked their whole life for isn't really nirvana the way it's always been promised.
And in some cases, when the college scholarship is presented to them as an option, once they get there, they find this is not a full scholarship. This is a scholarship that is divided into, in some cases, several different smaller scholarships. And the parents are going, this is saving a couple thousand a year. I could have easily paid that and prevented all of these problems leading up to this.
There's a terrible deception and misconception about the quantity and level of college scholarships in Division I. There are, of course, various divisions, but at Division I, only basketball and football regularly provide what we might call full scholarships or full rides. In almost all other sports, there's a certain maximum number of scholarship equivalencies, they call them, that the NCAA allows. And for most non-revenue sports, they'll be in the range of 9, 12, 14, rarely more than 18. Now you have twice that many people, or sometimes 2.5 times that many people on a roster. And so coaches and athletic directors have to decide how to divide up those scholarship equivalencies. Many schools don't give out the maximum allowed in any sport. So in soccer, for instance, the NCAA allows 14 scholarships, 14 scholarship equivalencies. So if the school decides to offer those 14 equivalencies, and they have a team which is on average about 28 people, at most people will get half of a scholarship. But most schools don't have the maximum allowed, so they might have 10 or 11 equivalencies that they then have to divide up among 28 people. And you start talking about smaller and smaller amounts of money for college tuition bills that are going up faster and faster. And the parents had no idea, the kids had no idea. The schools I don't think they lie to people, but they don't provide information up front. The NCAA doesn't tell you where you can go to get some of this information that they do make available. They don't make all of it available. So there's a kind of, I wouldn't call it consumer fraud, but there's consumer misperceptions and misconceptions and misdirection. We call it consumer misdirection. That just people are not making decisions with a full slate of information.
The book, we're talking about how college athletics are hurting girls' sports, the pay-to-play pipeline. With us on the program, Rick Eckstein. He is the author of the book. He's a best-selling author, sports scholar, professor of sociology at Villanova University, where he came up with the idea of writing the book. Some think that this is an admissions advantage. Maybe not necessarily going to get a big scholarship somewhere, but this is going to help get me in an Ivy League school, for example. Is that the way it works?
Oh, yeah, and it happens. And the same with scholarships. There are scholarships, and there are people who will get admitted to schools because of their sports prowess that probably would not have been admitted without that sports qualification. But it's not everybody. It's a small percentage. And you may be lucky enough to be one of those people, and all the parents who are out there think that they're going to be among that slim minority who's going to be selected for a school, for admissions to a college that their daughter might not have gotten into otherwise. And in order to do that, there are all these promises dangled in front of them that in order to maximize that opportunity, this is the team you have to play on, this is the camp you have to go to, this is the coach you have to talk to, this is the consultant that you have to confer with. And everybody has their magic elixir, and it is literally a multi-billion-dollar youth sports industry that is trying to take advantage of these misperceptions that parents and families have.
Well, you talk about it's not about the love of the game anymore or the dream of athletic glory. It's the pipeline, and time is going by way too quickly. But let's talk about the pipeline. A lot of people making a lot of money and a lot of parents that have the checkbook open that are willing to write the checks. Talk about that and who's making money along the way, and even professional coaches get involved in this process.
Yeah, there are people who make an inordinate amount of money at every stage of what I call these pay-to-play pipelines. And what's also important about them is not all the folks who are making money who have their hand in the till at various spots, whether it be coaches or leagues, the tournaments that are abounding in which college coaches use for most of their recruiting now is not done at high schools. And that all combined together, what you have is a very exclusive entry and navigation through these pipelines. They're literally pay to play. And so there are families and individuals who simply can't afford to get involved in this industry, in this commercial process, and so they drop out. Either at the beginning, they never go into the next level of a certain sport, or as they're going through it and the costs and the demands get greater and greater, they drop out. So what you're left, now ironically maybe, is not necessarily with individuals who are the best at playing, but the ones who are best at paying, because it's kind of a survival of the richest to get through these pipelines. And so you've got college scholarships and admissions advantages going to people who, in some regards, need them the least financially.
You talk about 9-year-old girls, for example, that play soccer, love playing soccer, quit to focus on lacrosse because they're led to believe their best shot at getting into an Ivy League school is playing lacrosse. So you have kids, and who knows whether they'll ever get a college scholarship or not, giving up something that they really enjoy to play something they may not for this dangling promise that is out there for them.
Yeah, here in the Northeast, if we have it actually happens in two ways. So girls will give up softball because that's a spring sport like lacrosse, in order to go into lacrosse, which I don't think it's quite that large out in Indiana yet, but it's starting to spread. And there's a lot less competition for college scholarships in lacrosse than there are in softball. But the soccer point is almost even more insidious, because soccer, at least in most parts of the country, is a fall sport. And the reason they have to give up their fall sport to concentrate on a spring sport is because the spring sport is demanding that they play that sport all year round, that they not only play in season but also have out of season tournaments and out of season training. And so if they want to participate at this so-called next level, they have to give up their other interests. That might include summer swimming. If they're involved in say, swimming at the local Y or at a summer swim club, they have to give that up as well, or else they won't be allowed to be on these teams.
A couple minutes left in the program. Rick Eckstein, our guest on the program, talking about how college athletics are hurting girls' sports. That's the name of the book, To Pay to Play Pipeline. You have suggestions, from simple tweaks to what you call the nuclear option. Talk about a couple of those that are realistic, that schools, principals should be looking at, things that we could do to make this better, and what we all want, which is an enjoyable experience for the young athletes.
Yeah, well, the basic premise of the book, Rick, is that the youth sports landscape looks the way it does because of what goes on in higher education. And so if we're going to change those things that we don't like about youth sports and the commercialization of youth sports, that's not going to happen unless higher education changes its ways, unless higher education stops using intercollegiate athletics as a very expensive way to do public relations and to brand themselves, and to, again, using that nomenclature, they think they're going to get their school, their university, to that next level, whatever that next level means. And so if we scale back the importance of intercollegiate athletics, that will have a corresponding influence on the youth sports industry. But short of that, in the meantime, high schools can pitch in. Now, high schools are not really part of the pipeline anymore. As I mentioned earlier, most recruiting gets done now in showcase tournaments and commercial tournaments that are independent of high schools, except maybe in football and basketball, where some recruiting still happens. So if high schools could almost provide a respite from some of the commercial madness and make sure that their sports programs really do focus on fun and self-growth and working together with friends, rather than on winning games and winning championships and always looking to use sports as some kind of a marquee for how good your school is or how good your county is. And I think, and back to the college level, short of, say, doing away with intercollegiate athletics, if there was just a little more truth in advertising, if the schools and if the NCAA was a little more honest about the reality, about what the scholarship situation really looks like, about how many people actually do get admissions advantages and what the likelihood is in various sports, I think that kind of accurate information might allow parents to make better decisions. And also, one thing that I would argue also is to do away with showcase tournaments and for college coaches to stop recruiting and instead hold open tryouts. That would level the playing field and help dismantle the real negative aspects of the youth sports pipeline.
30 seconds left in the show. You say it's a problem for both young men, young girls. You thought that the situation with young girls was even worse, didn't you?
Yeah, and only because it's not that girls are different than boys, or in some regards they are, and I think some of the physical injuries take a larger toll on them. But girls' sports and women's sports has been expanding so rapidly over the last 20 and 30 years, while men's sports at the high school and college level has been pretty static in terms of the numbers of people involved. And of course, that's a result of Title IX, opening up a lot of opportunities for women and girls that didn't exist before. So I just found the whole women's scene, the female scene, to be more interesting because it's been growing more recently.
So much more to talk about, and hopefully we'll have a chance to do it once again with Rick. And it's a must-read book if you're a parent, How College Athletics Are Hurting Girls' Sports, The Pay-to-Play Pipeline. The book is available all across the country. Rick Eckstein, our guest on the program. Book is an excellent read. Rick, it's a pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you so much for being with us, and hopefully we can do this again.
Thank you, Rick. It's great being with you.
Rick Eckstein, our guest on the program. Once again, the book, How College Athletics Are Hurting Girls' Sports, The Pay-to-Play Pipeline. Information available on our website, thisweekinamerica.us. We're back after these messages.